Late April 1892, West 11th Street, Greenwich Village. A woman named Anna Sutherland Buchanan lay dying in an upstairs bedroom, her headache so severe she could not stand. Her husband, a physician, leaned over her in the half-dark and touched something to her eyes. Within hours, she was in a coma she would not leave. The death certificate that followed said, cerebral hemorrhage. It was a lie. The man who wrote it was Dr. Robert W. Buchanan. He was a doctor who had studied another poisoner's fatal mistake. He believed he had corrected for it. Before we go further, take a moment to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a case like this one. Now, back to New York. Robert W. Buchanan arrived in New York City from Nova Scotia around 1886 to practice medicine. He brought with him his wife, Helen, and their young daughter. His birth year is given in different sources as both 1860 and 1862. The record does not settle it, and nothing turns on the exact number. What matters is what he became in New York. He was a physician with a taste for the city's nightlife. Before long, he was a man carrying debts he could not explain to his wife. By the end of the 1880s, his marriage to Helen was failing. At some point in this period, he began a relationship with a woman named Anna Sutherland. She was the keeper of a house of prostitution in Newark, New Jersey. Anna was older than Buchanan, though sources disagree on the gap. Some say roughly 10 years, others say 20. She was also, by the standards of her trade and her city, a wealthy woman. Her estate, when the question later mattered in a courtroom, was valued at approximately $50,000. The sequence of what followed is documented with unusual precision. On November 12, 1890, Buchanan's divorce from Helen was made final. On November 27th, Anna Sutherland rewrote her will. She named Buchanan the principal beneficiary. 2 days after that, on November 29th, 1890, Buchanan married her. For a period afterward, Buchanan did not present Anna to acquaintances as his wife. He introduced her as his housekeeper. The record does not explain this choice. The couple did eventually settle together as husband and wife on West 11th Street in Greenwich Village. This was a New York City that was, in the early 1890s, in the middle of a circulation war between competing daily newspapers. It was a city where a commercial sex trade operated with a kind of open, semi-tolerated visibility. And it was a city where the science of detecting poison in a human body was still new. That science would soon be argued over, point by point, in front of a jury. The marriage soured. Friends later testified that Buchanan called Anna the old hag. He was heard to say he needed to get rid of her, no matter what it cost him. He continued running up debts, pursuing the bars and brothels of the city he had once served as a doctor. Anna, for her part, began threatening something Buchanan could not accept. She said she would leave him, return to Newark, and take her fortune with her. It was in this same period, roughly a year before Anna's death, that a case broke in the New York papers that Buchanan followed closely. A medical student named Carlisle Harris had murdered his wife with morphine. Harris had been caught because morphine leaves a distinctive sign in its victims. It draws the pupils down to pinpoints. They become small enough that a doctor examining the body could read them like a warning label. Buchanan is reported to have called Harris a bungling fool. He boasted, more than once, that he knew how to avoid the very mistake that had convicted Harris. The exact wording of that boast does not survive in any primary record. It is retold consistently enough across the secondary accounts that it is worth stating here. But it should be understood as a widely reported anecdote, not a verbatim quotation. If this case is holding your attention the way it held New York's in 1893, consider a like and a subscribe. It helps us keep uncovering these forgotten cases. Now, back to the record. Early in 1892, Anna's threats to leave grew more serious. She had the money. She had a business of her own to return to. She had, on paper, no reason to stay. Buchanan, according to the friends who later testified, had every reason to want her gone before she could take that fortune out of his reach. The morning that would end Anna's life is fixed in the indictment to April 22, 1892. Some secondary accounts push the date as late as April 26th. It is safest to say late April of that year. On that morning, Anna made breakfast. Buchanan brought her coffee. Soon after, she developed a headache so severe she could not stand upright. A doctor named McIntyre, her regular physician, was called to the house. He diagnosed hysteria. He prescribed sodium bromide. When her condition did not improve, he increased her dose of chloral hydrate. That evening, a woman named Mrs. Brockway was present in the household. She witnessed something she would later describe under oath. She saw Buchanan give Anna 2 teaspoons of a substance. Anna's face twisted at the taste. She reached for an orange and sucked on it, as though trying to cover something bitter in her mouth. Within about 15 minutes, she fell into a coma from which she would not wake. During those final hours, the household's nurse observed Buchanan bending over his unconscious wife. He appeared to be applying drops to her eyes. Anna Sutherland Buchanan died the next day. Dr. McIntyre, still believing he was treating a case of hysteria and stroke, certified the cause of death as cerebral hemorrhage. The certificate closed the matter on paper before it had properly opened. The mechanism behind what had happened in that bedroom would not be understood for months, but it can be stated plainly here because it is what the prosecution would later prove. Buchanan is believed to have given Anna a fatal dose of morphine. A prosecution toxicologist later estimated the dose at somewhere between 5 and 6 grains. He disguised it in the liquid Mrs. Brockway saw him administer. Morphine of that quantity slows breathing and brings on a coma. It also does something else. It draws the pupils down to pinpoints, the same telltale sign that had convicted Carlisle Harris a year before. To counter that sign, Buchanan is believed to have applied atropine. Atropine is an extract of the belladonna plant. He applied it directly to Anna's eyes while she lay dying. Atropine does the opposite of morphine. It dilates the pupil. Applied together, the 2 drugs could cancel out each other's most obvious symptom. That left a doctor at the bedside with nothing to see that would suggest poison. It very nearly worked. Anna was buried. Dr. McIntyre's certificate stood unchallenged. Buchanan told a friend in the days after her death that Providence had been smiling on him. He was seen out in the city in good spirits, discussing openly the roughly $50,000 inheritance that had just come to him. Then, he made the mistake that would undo everything the poison had covered. In mid to late May of 1892, about 3 weeks after Anna's death, Buchanan traveled to Nova Scotia. There, he married Helen, the wife he had divorced a year and a half earlier. A reporter for the New York World named Ike White heard rumors that spring about the strange speed of Buchanan's remarriage. White made a habit of chasing down exactly this kind of rumor. He worked for a paper that was, at the time, locked in fierce competition with its rivals for readers. He began asking questions about Anna Sutherland Buchanan's death. What he found convinced him the certified cause of death did not fit what people who had known Anna were saying privately. White's reporting created pressure that an informal rumor alone could not have. Newspapers in that period could not order an exhumation themselves, but they could make it politically necessary for the authorities to order one. On June 5, 1892, that is exactly what happened. Anna Sutherland Buchanan's body was ordered exhumed. Anna had been dead, buried, and legally settled for weeks. Even so, the exhumation order was itself an extraordinary step. It marked the true beginning of the case against her husband. The autopsy that followed found no trace of the cerebral hemorrhage Dr. McIntyre had certified. Instead, chemical analysis recovered morphine from Anna's remains. In some accounts, atropine or belladonna alkaloid was found alongside it. The man responsible for that chemical analysis was Professor Rudolph A. Witthaus. He was a professor of chemistry and toxicology who would become the case's central prosecution witness. Witthaus used a set of alkaloid color tests. These were still relatively new to American courtrooms in 1892. They included the Pellegrini test, the Huysman test, and the Froda test. Each produced a distinct color change when it reacted with morphine present in tissue. Witthaus recovered roughly 1/10 of a grain of residual morphine from what remained of Anna's body. This was more than a year and a half after burial. From that residue, he extrapolated a fatal original dose of 5 to 6 grains. Witthaus went further. He testified that atropine, present alongside the morphine, explained something that might otherwise have cleared Buchanan. It explained the absence of the pinpoint pupils that had convicted Carlisle Harris. Morphine slows the body and constricts the pupil. Atropine dries the skin, flushes the face, and dilates the pupil. Given together, in roughly the right proportions, the two drugs' effects on the eye could largely cancel out. Morphine's effect on breathing and consciousness remained fully lethal the whole time. It was, in Vitthouse's telling, not an accident that Anna's eyes had shown nothing unusual. It was engineering. The indictment that followed the exhumation charged Buchanan with murder in the first degree. It specified that he had administered 5 grains weight of a certain deadly poison called morphine. It also charged him with using a certain deadly poison to the grand jury unknown. That second phrase is understood to mean the atropine component the chemists had found. The date given was April 22, 1892. Buchanan was to be tried before Recorder Smith, the judicial officer who presided over New York's Court of General Sessions. The trial opened on March 20, 1893. It ran for more than 5 weeks, concluding April 26th. The prosecution was led by DeLance Nicole, James W. Osborne, and Francis L. Wellman. They were assistant district attorneys who divided the case between the medical evidence and the cross-examination of Buchanan himself. Buchanan's defense was led by Charles W. Brooks and William J. O'Sullivan. O'Sullivan was no ordinary defense lawyer. He had trained as a physician before turning to law. In preparing for this trial, he spent roughly 6 months reading the toxicology literature on morphine. He wanted to cross-examine the prosecution's chemists on their own ground. Mrs. Brockway took the stand. She repeated what she had seen in the house on West 11th Street. She described the 2 teaspoons, Anna's grimace, and the orange pressed to her mouth to cover a bitter taste. The nurse who had watched Buchanan bend over his comatose wife testified to what she had seen him do with his hands near her eyes. Neither witness could say what substance had been given. Both could say, plainly, what they had observed. Professor Whithouse took the stand for days. He walked the jury through his chemical findings, the residual morphine, the estimated fatal dose, and the physiological logic of atropine masking morphine's telltale sign. For the defense, Professor Victor C. Vaughan attempted to dismantle that chemistry. Vaughan argued that the Pellegrini test, on which much of Vitthouse's morphine identification rested, was not as specific as the prosecution claimed. He testified that ptomaines, alkaloid compounds produced by ordinary tissue decay, could produce the same purple to cherry red color reaction the test used to signal morphine. If a body left in the ground for months could generate false positives on its own, Vaughan argued, the prosecution's chemistry proved nothing. Whitehouse answered this directly. He testified that the false reactions Vaughan had produced came from impurities in the chemicals Vaughan used. They were not the result of any flaw in the test itself. He stated that no such deceptive p-ptomaine reaction had so far been observed anywhere in the world under properly controlled laboratory conditions. It was chemist against chemist, each backed by demonstrations performed for the jury's benefit. The outcome of the entire trial rode substantially on which expert the 12 men in the jury box chose to believe. O'Sullivan's cross-examination of the prosecution's chemical witnesses was, by every account, rigorous. He pressed each of them on the specific mechanics of the ferric chloride test, the Huysman test, and the Froda test. He was probing for any point at which decomposition, contamination, or simple human error might have produced a false result. For a lawyer with no formal medical training beyond his own months of study, it was an unusually informed cross-examination. It reflected exactly how much of this trial turned on chemistry rather than eyewitness testimony. The trial's most vivid moment came from the prosecution. It was aimed squarely at proving the atropine masking theory to a jury. That jury could not be expected to follow chemical formulas alone. Prosecutors brought a live cat into the courtroom. They injected it with a dose of morphine sufficient to constrict its pupils to pinpoints. That was the same sign morphine would have left in Anna's eyes before atropine masked it. Then, in front of the jury, they applied atropine drops to the cat's eyes. The pupils, which morphine had drawn down to points, opened wide. The cat died during the demonstration. It was, and remains, the case's most retold detail. It was proof, staged in front of 12 jurors, of exactly the mechanism the prosecution said Buchanan had used on his wife. But the piece of testimony credited most directly with convicting Buchanan came from Buchanan himself. He took the stand in his own defense. Francis Wellman's cross-examination caught him in a series of contradictions. These concerned his relationship with Anna and his conduct in the days before her death. They also concerned his claimed ignorance of what atropine could do to a dying woman's eyes. A man who had reportedly boasted, before the fact, that he knew how to avoid Carlisle Harris's mistake now sat in a witness chair. He insisted he had done nothing of the kind. The jury watched him say it. The jury retired to deliberate on the afternoon of April 25, 1893. They remained out for approximately 28 hours, carrying their discussion through the night and into the following day. When they returned to the courtroom on April 26th, the foreman delivered a verdict of murder in the first degree. Under New York law of that period, a first-degree murder conviction carried a single available sentence. Recorder Smith pronounced it, Buchanan was to die in the electric chair. Buchanan's counsel did not let the verdict stand unchallenged. Brooks and O'Sullivan carried the case forward on appeal. They argued again the point Vaughn had raised at trial. Chemical tests used to identify morphine in Anna's remains, they said, could not reliably be distinguished from the ptomaine reactions produced by ordinary decomposition. The appeal reached the New York Court of Appeals. The case was recorded there as People v. Buchanan, 145 New York Reports, page 1. The appellate court took the ptomaine argument seriously enough to address it at length, rather than dismiss it outright. It examined the prosecution's own account of how the testing had been conducted. It noted that the chemists involved, Witthaus among them, had testified to their own familiarity with the ptomaine interference problem. Even so, they had arrived at uniform results, identifying pure morphine across repeated independent analyses. The court held that this chemical consistency, combined with the physical symptoms witnessed at Anna's bedside, was sufficient to support the jury's verdict. Those symptoms included the coma, the missing pinpoint pupils, and the household testimony of Mrs. Brockway and the nurse. The conviction was affirmed. Buchanan's execution was set for Sing Sing Prison in Ossining, New York. The date was July 2, 1895, more than 2 years after the jury had returned its verdict. One secondary reference gives the date as July 1st, but the weight of the record points to July 2nd. It was on that date that the sentence was carried out. Robert W. Buchanan is remembered today as the man who studied another poisoner's downfall and thought he had corrected for it. His trial stands as one of the earliest American murder cases decided almost entirely on the strength of forensic chemistry. It was a direct successor to the Carlisle Harris case in the courtroom history of pinpoint pupils as evidence of poisoning. The image of that cat remains the detail most often retold from the case. Its pupils were constricted by morphine, then forced wide by a doctor's drops. It was a small, strange demonstration, performed once for 12 jurors and remembered for more than a century afterward. The appellate opinion that followed his conviction is still cited today. Discussions still weigh how reliable and how fragile the earliest chemical tests for poison truly were. He believed a dead woman's eyes could be made to lie for him. A reporter's suspicion, a chemist's patience, and a jury's 28 hours undid that belief completely. If you want to see more cases like this one, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next. Leave a comment with the case you would like covered next.